Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we are taking on a feeling. A feeling I think every single person listening right now can relate to.
Hmm.
You know that specific sensation when the world just feels loud?
Loud, fast, and just completely unmanageable.
Exactly. It's a visceral feeling of chaos. You scroll through the news, you check your work Slack, and it just feels like the signal-to-noise ratio is, well, it's gone.
It's overwhelming. And the source material we're covering today, it starts with this hook that I found really, really powerful.
Me too. It suggests that in those moments of peak chaos, we don't actually pray for miracles.
No, we don't. We might think we do, but we don't.
We pray for someone who sees what we cannot.
It's such a profound distinction.
Yeah.
The text makes it right out of the gate. We aren't looking for a wizard to wave a wand and change reality.
Yeah. We're looking for someone to look at that same chaotic, messy reality.
And just spot the pattern we missed.
The Architect of Clarity, which is the title of the text we're deconstructing today. The Architect of Clarity, the legacy of Sherlock Holmes.
Right. And before anyone thinks this is just about, Robert Downey Jr. or Benedict Cumberbatch.
Right, pop in his collar.
We're going way, way deeper.
We have to, because if you only know the guy with the hat and the pipe, you're missing the actual point of the character.
You are. This text frames Holmes not as a detective, or not just as a detective, but as a, quote, symbol of human reason standing its ground.
Standing its ground. I love that phrasing. It implies there's an attack happening.
There is an assault of noise, of confusion. And our mission today is to unpack why a character invented in the gaslit 1800s is somehow still our best coping mechanism.
We're going to dig into the radical idea the source claims Holmes promised us, that nothing is truly unknowable.
If you just have the discipline to look closely enough.
So let's start with that context. Let's go back in time. Because to get why Holmes was such a phenomenon, we have to understand the world he was born into.
And reading the source's description of late Victorian London, it sounded uncomfortably familiar.
It really does. I think we have this sort of BBC period drama version in our heads, Cozy cobblestones, fog.
Everyone being very polite.
Yeah. But the source paints a much more anxious picture. It wasn't cozy. It was terrifying.
It was a time of absolute upheaval.
Right.
I mean, you have to remember, cities like London were exploding in size.
Right.
You went from these tight-knit communities where everyone knew your cousin to these massive, anonymous urban sprawls, almost overnight.
Which changes the nature of crime, doesn't it? And the nature of fear.
Fundamentally. In a small village, a murderer is, probably the guy down the street with a grudge.
Everyone knows the motive.
Exactly.
Oh.
But in a city of millions, the killer is a face in the crowd. They can just vanish. The source says that for the first time, people felt a real fear of the unknown corners of modern life.
And then there's the science aspect. The text says science was starting to replace superstition. And usually we think of that as a good thing.
Progress.
Yeah, the Enlightenment, vaccines. But the source argues this was actually a major source of anxiety. Why was that?
Because superstition, for all its faults, it offers a story. It offers comfort. It says, this happened because of fate or spirits.
It gives you a reason.
It does. Science is cold. It's indifferent. And frankly, it was moving so fast, the average person couldn't keep up. Electricity, telegraphs, new forensics. The world was getting complicated.
So you have a population that is overstimulated, crowded, surrounded by strangers, and terrified the world is too complex to understand.
And then enter Sherlock Holmes.
And he doesn't walk in and say, it's all going to be okay. He doesn't offer a hug.
No. He walks in and says, watch closely. That's his solution.
The phrase the source uses that really stuck with me is that Holmes transformed chaos into puzzles.
And fear into patterns. And think about the psychology of that shift. It is so critical.
Right.
If something is chaotic, it's a threat. It's a monster. But if you turn that same threat into a puzzle...
Puzzles have solutions.
Puzzles have solutions. Puzzles have rules. It's a containment strategy. It makes the terrifying manageable.
So reading the stories becomes a way to, process the anxiety of the modern world?
Precisely. It was a coping mechanism. It was a simulation of taming the world.
Which brings us to the man himself, because he is a very, very strange hero to pin all our hopes on. He is definitely not Captain America.
No, he's the anti-hero before we really had a word for it.
The source points out that traditional heroes, they arrive with a sword or a crown. They're these big, physically dominant figures. Holmes shows up with a pipe.
A pipe? A magnifying glass, and, as the text puts it so beautifully, a stare that made grown men uncomfortable.
That discomfort is key, isn't it? He isn't nice.
He's not supposed to be.
No.
Nice doesn't solve impossible crimes. He doesn't chase villains for glory. He doesn't use brute force.
The text says he dismantled them calmly, piece by piece.
As if the truth itself were the real weapon. And that's a fascinating subversion of the hero myth. You know, the weapon isn't external, it's internal.
He weaponizes observations.
He does.
But let's talk about his personality. The common critique is that he's cold, a robot, or, to quote the modern version, a high-functioning sociopath.
Right.
But the source text actually argues against that.
It does. It says calling him cold misses the point. He isn't heartless, he is focused. And those are very different things.
So how does it distinguish them? Because he seems pretty rude.
It uses this really great comparison to a monk or a sorcerer.
A sorcerer. That seems like a contradiction for a man of logic.
Well, think about the archetype. The sorcerer or the monk. They achieve power through sacrifice. They give up what normal people enjoy. Relationships, leisure, a normal sleep schedule.
In order to access some higher ability.
Yes. So his lack of social grace isn't because he doesn't get people. It's because he's decided it's clutter.
It's a trade-off. He clears away emotional niceties to make room for pure observation.
Exactly. He sacrifices normal to be extraordinary.
Speaking of clutter, we have to talk about the apartment. 221B Baker Street.
The most famous address in literature?
Right. We picture it as this cool, quirky bachelor pad, but the source describes it as a laboratory of thought.
And laboratories are messy.
Yeah, it lists papers everywhere, chemical experiments burning, tobacco pinned to the mantle with a knife, violin at 3 in the morning.
It's not a home. That's the key point the source makes. A home is for rest, for comfort. This is a workspace for a brain that never, ever shuts off.
It reinforces that idea of extreme specialization, and that brings us to his method. The source calls it logic as sorcery.
This is my favorite part of the whole analysis, because it explains why the stories feel so magical, even though there's no magic in them.
He looks at things we all ignore. The text lists things like the smudge on a sleeve, the hesitation in a voice.
The footprint everyone else stepped over.
Right. Now, in ancient stories, to find the truth, who did you go to?
You went to a seer, a shaman, someone who could access a hidden world.
Exactly. Holmes occupies that same role in the story, but the hidden world he accesses is reality.
It's the reality right in front of our faces that we are too busy to see. He reads people the way a shaman reads bones. The source says he makes logic feel like sorcery because the reveal has the same punch as a magic trick.
It's the big explain-o moment at the end of every story.
Yes, and the source captures the reader's reaction to that perfectly. It describes it as a mix of awe and embarrassment.
I have felt that. Why the embarrassment, though?
Because the answer was right there. We're embarrassed because we have eyes, just like him. We saw the sleeve, we heard the voice, but we didn't see it.
We feel inadequate because he proves the world is legible and we're just illiterate.
Exactly. But it's an exhilarating kind of stupid.
It is. But, you know, if the books were just Holmes being smarter than everyone for 300 pages, they'd be insufferable.
Oh, completely unbearable. You'd throw the book across the room.
Which brings us to the other half of the equation, the essential Watson.
You cannot have Holmes without Watson. The source is very blunt about this. It says without him, Holmes would be alienating.
I always just saw Watson as the sidekick, the guy asking the simple questions. But the source says his function is much more technical.
He's the audience stand-in, for sure. He asks the questions we want to ask. But more than that, he's the emotional anchor.
He's the translator.
In a way.
Yeah.
But think about those classic partnerships. You see this everywhere. Star Trek, House MD.
Yep.
You have the brilliant, cold, logical figure.
Spock and Kirk, House and Wilson.
Exactly. Paired with the grounded, emotional humanist. It's the balance of reason and empathy. The source says Watson keeps Holmes tethered to the world.
So if Holmes is a balloon floating into the stratosphere of pure logic,
Watson is the string holding him to the ground. He provides the humanity that Holmes sacrificed.
and that allows us to like Holmes.
Yes, we like Holmes because Watson likes him. If this decent, warm, normal doctor, a war hero, not an idiot, if he thinks Holmes is worthwhile, we trust his judgment.
That's a really good point. So we have the method, we have the partnership, but I want to pivot to the philosophy here because the source raises what it calls an uncomfortable question about his skills.
This is where it gets a little existential.
Yeah, the text emphasizes that Holmes isn't Superman. He wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider. He doesn't have magic powers.
No, he has discipline.
And that's the uncomfortable part. Because if his skill is just extreme discipline and attention, it forces us to ask, if the answers are right in front of us, why do we miss them?
It puts the blame back on us, doesn't it? It implies our confusion is a choice, or at least a failure of effort.
Ooh, that stings. Why do we miss them?
The source suggests we rush. We assume. We let our biases fill in the gaps instead of actually looking. We ignore what we think is irrelevant.
But Holmes teaches that nothing is irrelevant.
He does. And the source states, and this is probably the most important line in the whole text, that for Holmes, paying attention is a moral act.
A moral act, not just a skill, not a trick. A moral act. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, think about the consequences of not paying attention in his world. If you miss the detail, an innocent person goes to jail. A villain goes free. Chaos wins. So by paying attention, by sacrificing his comfort to see the truth, Holmes restores justice. He creates order.
So attention is the tool of justice.
Correct. Holmes believes that truth exists, which is, a surprisingly controversial stance today where we talk about my truth and your truth. Holmes says, no, there is the truth. It's hidden, but it is there.
And making the effort to dig it up is a virtue.
The source describes this belief as almost rebellious.
Rebellious, that's a funny word for a guy in a tweed suit.
But look at the world he lived in, and look at ours. It is designed to distract you. It is designed to make you skim, to react emotionally, not logically. In that context, simply stopping, shutting up, and observing, that is an act of rebellion.
He doesn't shout, he listens.
And that listening cuts through all the noise. It's a very quiet, very powerful form of rebellion.
It's amazing because this character has been doing this for over 100 years. He's totally escaped the original pages. He's basically folklore now.
He's a global archetype. And the source touches on his adaptability as a key reason for that.
Yeah, we've seen so many versions. Basil Rathbone fighting Nazis, the Jeremy Brett definitive version, the manic energy of the Downey Jr. movies.
The high-tech Cumberbatch version, even House MD, is a medical Holmes. And the source explains why this happens. Different eras reshape him to answer their own fears about truth and intelligence.
So in the 1940s, we needed a patriotic, steady Holmes.
And in the 2010s, with the explosion of data, we needed a Holmes who was a processor, who could handle all that information at speed.
But the source argues that even with all these costume changes, the core is still the same.
He can be sharp, playful, dark, damaged. But the core, the pursuit of clarity, that never changes. He represents the idea that the world can be understood.
It's just amazing that a character invented to soothe the anxieties of the 1890s is still doing the exact same job for us.
It speaks to how deep that need for control goes. We're still scared of the dark, still scared of the complex city. We still crave that symbol of reason standing its ground.
So let's bring this all together. We've looked at the context, the anti-hero persona, the sorcery of logic, the morality of attention. What's the final takeaway?
I think it comes back to that central promise. Holmes represents control. He represents the belief that if we slow down and actually look, the world becomes less scary.
It transforms from a threat into a puzzle.
Exactly. But, and there is a but here, the source ends on a very provocative note. It's not a happily ever after kind of thing.
No, it's not. It raises a distinction between happiness and clarity.
Yeah, Holmes isn't a happy guy, is he? He doesn't finish a case and throw a party.
No, he doesn't go out for drinks.
He rarely celebrates. The moment the puzzle is solved, the adrenaline fades and he just crashes. He falls into boredom or depression until the next problem.
And the source says, Sherlock Holmes does not promise happiness. He promises clarity.
That is a powerful trade-off.
It is.
And the final thought from the source is really something to sit with. It says, once you've tasted that clarity, the fog of everyday life feels harder to accept.
That's the danger, isn't it? Ignorance is bliss, but clarity is work. It's painful.
It is a discipline. And once you start seeing the world that clearly, the smudges, the hesitations, the patterns behind the lies, you can't really go back to sleep. You can't unsee it.
You become responsible for what you see. So I guess the question for you listening is this. Are you willing to make that trade? The source frames Holmes as an invitation to stop drifting through the fog and start looking. It's a tough choice, giving up the comfort of easy answers. But, as Holmes would probably say, the truth is the only thing worth having.
Always.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Keep your eyes open, and we'll see you next time.